Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. It's right at 4 o'clock. I am Shannon Egan. I'm the director of the Schmucker Art Gallery, and it's so nice to see you all here this afternoon. Typically, with our Art History Methods exhibition, we are in the gallery and we are celebrating the students' accomplishments, and we're enjoying, the beautiful exhibition that they've worked so hard on this afternoon. So I appreciate everyone's efforts to connect the way that we can during the pandemic. I want to mention first that these talks are being recorded, and I'm going to help moderate the questions and comments at the end of the talks. And so if you prefer to not be on video, please type your questions in the chat box, and I will read those to our student presenters at the end of the session. But this will be recorded and it will be available on the college's YouTube channel a few days after this event. I also want to remind you that the second part of the gallery talks will be on Friday at 4 o'clock with the Zoom link again. So I'm looking forward to seeing everyone there Friday at 4 o'clock again. I know Yan will extend her thank yous, but I just want to express my gratitude to Carolyn Sauter, Catherine Perry, to everyone, to Karen Drickemer, to everyone in the College's Special Collections and College Archives. I also want to thank Sydney Gush for her expertise in getting the work on the walls in preparation for this talk. Even though we can't be here, she really hustled to get the work on the walls so that we could imagine ourselves in this space. So with that, I also want to just congratulate Yan Soon and all of her students on a really, really remarkable job this semester. Please stay tuned. We will be opening the exhibition on Friday, February 5th. If everything goes well and the college stays on track, we will be open to at least the Gettysburg community Friday, February 5th. We will have catalogs available, then kind of hard copy catalogs available. And in the meantime, if you want kind of more behind the scenes shots and other sneak previews of the exhibition, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Schmucker Art Gallery. So with that, I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to you, Ian. So thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you for the introduction. Let me share my screen first so you guys can see the beautiful installation view of the exhibition. Okay. All right. I really want to take this opportunity to thank a few individuals whose great efforts really make this student exhibition possible. First, I want to thank Dr. Shannon Egan, who really came up with the theme of this exhibition during the springtime of 2020. Shannon also worked with Caroline Sauter, the director of the Special Collections, and me during the summer to work out the details of the exhibition. During the semester, Caroline Sauter and Catherine Perry worked creatively and tirelessly to assist virtual visits, allowing student curators to examine their works remotely. Special thanks must also go to Megan Smith for individual Zoom sessions with each of the 15 students in the class. This is a big class, so Megan worked tirelessly with each one of them. Megan also spent many hours to work with other members in the library to mail books and email journal articles to the students. The superb research support the class has received from the library is not possible without the leadership of Robin Wagner, the Dean of the Musselman Library. Last but not least, we thank Shannon and Sydney Gush for the beautiful installation of the exhibition. Finally, I would like to dedicate this exhibition and the exhibition catalog to our former colleague, Karen Drickemer. I think Karen is here today. Karen served as the director of Special Collections and college archivist from 1919 to 2011. She retired from the college this summer. Karen has provided wonderful research supports for the Asian art exhibitions of the mastered class. With respect and gratitude, we dedicate this exhibition to Karen. Okay, so now I'm going to turn to the students for their presentation. There are a couple of installation views I want to quickly show to the audience here. And yes, so the first presenter is Sam. Sam, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Hi.
Okay, great.
So for my piece, I did the miniature Yang bronze bell. So the miniature Yang bronze bell in the collection at Gettysburg College is a replication from the Qing Dynasty based on Zhou Dynasty prototypes. Originated in the Western Zhou Dynasty along the northern Yangtze River, the style of this bell existed for hundreds of years. During the Zhou Dynasty, Yang bells were always used and owned by the upper class as ritual instruments. This Yang bell in the Gettysburg collection is made exclusively as a non-playable display artifact, which is characterized by its angular elliptical bottom and 4 sets of 9 protrusions with a replicated spiral patterning in between. These features can be observed on archaeologically discovered Yang bells in the tomb of the mid and late spring and autumn period of Jiwangu in Yishui County. The Gettysburg Bell also resembles the Yang bells of the whole set of 65 bronze bells in the tomb of Marquis Yi of Zhang of the early Warring States period in the middle Yangtze River Valley. The whole set, known as Biangzong, was thought to be played by 5 musicians as it was struck at the front and side with wooden mallets. To reach this specific musical sound, the size of the bell was also important, as were the incisions sketched inside. During the time of Marquis Yi, the use of a set of bronze bells was typical of extravagant displays at the regional court. Specific to the miniature Yang bell in the Gettysburg collection is an inscription on the front indicating the Duke of Zhou cast the original bell. The Duke of Zhou, active in the 11th century BCE, was the younger brother of Zhao Qingwu, the founder of the Zhou Dynasty. Confucius texts written in the Han Dynasty praised the Duke of Zhou for immense morals. As the highest ranking state official, he was credited for creating rituals and music, the cornerstone of ancient Chinese culture. Reverence for him has been carried out throughout the following dynasties in crafts such as the making of this miniature bronze bell imprinted with his name. This Yang bell demonstrates the cultural influence the Duke of Zhou had held. The Yang bells as cultural artifacts are lived objects that were used during the lifetime of their patrons and were of great value when buried in tombs. They continue to offer music to the deceased in the afterlife. The bell in the Gettysburg collection as a replication for display does not play music, but establishes physical and representational features of the Yang bells that are the embodiment of ancient Chinese culture that centered on rituals and music. Thank you. These are just 2 images. On the left, you have the Biangzong bell set from the tomb of Marquis Yi of Zhang. And on the right, you have one example of a Yang bell from the tomb of Jiwangu. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Nice job. Okay, Amanda, are you able to see your image?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So this bronze jiwei or libation cup is an example of one of the various bronze vessels utilized in burial ritual ceremonies, mainly for the highly honored. They were essential to the Shang Dynasty from roughly mid-16th century to 1050 BCE, yet the earliest record of it dates back to the early Tao period from roughly 1700 to 1500 BCE, making them the oldest bronze vessel found. Generally, the shape of the jiwei was designed to take on a bird-like form and also represent its purpose. This is shown with a wide spout for pouring, a pointed tail opposite the spout for tipping, and 3 pointed legs on the bottom of the vessel used to easily push into coals to be heated. Additionally, there are 2 caps on the top of the vessel and a handle on the body, both used for picking up the vessel depending on the vessel's temperature. On the upper body, there is a single banded decoration with small raised circles representing eyes, swirl patterns, and a raised dragon head on the handle. This decoration is known as Tauti, a monster animal face mask with a set of eyes. Animal motifs, including Tauti of the Han Dynasty, had many interpretations ranging from spiritual meanings with life and death to varying roles of their ancestors. Jue vessels were often adorned with a decorative Tauti band to be easily identifiable, since there could be up to 20 different vessels at a ritual ceremony, and to show that the more decorated it was, the more significant the vessel, and thus the more significant the deceased. On this particular Jue, underneath the handle, there is an inscription that connects the present and the past by including the name of the person who cast the vessel. There are two characters, Ga, a lineage name, followed by Zu, meaning ancestor, signifying the vessel was cast by a male member of the Ga lineage for his ancestor. The vessel was cast in bronze to signify the elite status of the deceased by being masterfully cast with a precious metal. They utilized a piece mold cast method by pouring melted bronze into various pieces of pre-decorated clay to create a mold of the vessel. This method showed the advanced knowledge needed for this important vessel and allowed the Jue to be seamless with very little repairs, allowing it to easily hold wine. The main use of the Jue was for the heating and pouring of wine during ancient ritual burials, and then afterward being buried with the deceased. Wine was utilized in these ceremonies because it caused hallucinations and contributed to the spiritual aspects of these ceremonies. The number of Jue used and buried showcased the elite status of the deceased. For example, in Fu Hao's tomb of the late Shang Dynasty around 1200 BCE, archaeologists uncovered 40 Jue, an extravagant display of her role as the consort of King Wu Ding. So thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Emily, are you ready?
Yes, hi. So for my research project this semester, I have been doing research on this jade horse from the Tang Dynasty. Crafted during the renowned Tang Dynasty, this jade horse stands small in stature at just over 2 inches tall, but is broad and bold in its meaning. The Tang Dynasty was a period that spanned from 618 AD to 907 and was a period of flourishing wealth, culture, and military prowess in China. The naturally imperfect jade mineral of this horse boasts a color range from bluish greens to grays and browns. Whereas a cloudy green occupies the majority of the bust surface, several distinct dark crags run through the horse's neck and are reminiscent of veins pumping blood and life into the animal. The attention to detail in the horse's snout, eyes, and specifically its idealized mane represent a deep knowledge of anatomy and spatial awareness as it comes to creating a smooth, naturalistic, and proportional figure. The use of jade in ancient Chinese culture is dated back to the 6th millennium BCE, and just like the Tang horse shows its beauty long outlives its makers. Jade was regarded as the essence of heaven and earth in traditional Chinese society, and subsequently stood for one's status, moral purity, and goodness as prescribed through Confucianist thought. The process of mining and cutting jade is quite an arduous task, and it is one that made this rare mineral even more prestigious and desirable. Jade was clearly not a random choice for this Tang horse. It was chosen to display the superior attributes of the animal it shaped: strength, beauty, and prestige. This piece was produced as a funerary artwork for a high-status member of society, combining the most esteemed characteristics of the horse itself and jade creates the perfect match to lay to rest alongside the deceased. In Tang culture, horses played a significant role in building China's prosperity and expanding its borders. The Tang capital of Chang'an was a bustling cosmopolitan city, yet as the second Tang emperor Taizong came to power, he had his sights set on the western frontier. Taizong was known for having 6 noble steeds that he frequently took into battle, and even supported the arts by commissioning a stone relief to commemorate each one. With the strength and speed of his horses, Taizong was able to capture lands far beyond known China in the name of his dynasty. In turn, horses became an extremely important commodity and were even recognized as honorable gifts of tribute from regions under his dominion. A specific breed of horses from Fergana to the west were prized as heavenly horses, and a condition causing them to sweat blood made Taizong's fierce reputation grow. One could suggest that this particular jade horse was created to emulate Taizong's and the Fergana horses and gift its deceased recipient with the celestial properties of protection, immortality, and glory in the afterlife. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
This small dish and spoon from the Eastern Han Dynasty are simply shaped without any conspicuous designs, inscriptions, or manufacturing elements to suggest a research direction. Their greenish-brown lead silicate glazes are the most distinctive visual feature and would later prove to be the feature that was most informative to my research. In addition to lead, the type of glaze used for this sort of object contained a small percentage of copper, cupric, and iron ferric oxides to form a certain color. Copper was the one used for these specific pieces because, as Nigel Wood explains, when an amount of about 3% cupric oxide is added to a glaze mixture and placed on top of a light red clay, the resulting piece of pottery would turn out as a shade of green very similar to these ones. However, such lead content is toxic. In order to understand the significance of these simply shaped pieces, we must first clarify the distinction between the two primary types of ancient Chinese burial objects, Shanki and Minki. These terms were originally coined by Eastern Zhao philosopher Xunzi. Xunzi's definition of Shanki translates to lived objects, meaning objects that were used or owned by the deceased person in his or her lifetime, and then buried with them in preparation for their afterlife in the Yellow Springs. Objects in this category ranged from possessions used in everyday life, such as utensils, to objects owned for more personal reasons, such as art or sentimentally valuable things that the deceased person would need or want to carry with them from life to death. In contrast, Xunzi's concept of minki, which translates to spirit articles, refers to objects made for use exclusively by the dead and never for use by the living. A lecture attributed to Confucius explains the need for spirit objects to be non-functional. In his opinion, they should only resemble real objects, but they should not be suited for actual use. Confucius thought that the deceased must not be treated as entirely dead, nor as entirely alive, but somewhere in between. Thus, creating articles that looked like the everyday objects of the living, or were only representational, was a fitting compromise. By this philosophy, the primary difference between Shanki and Minki is the intention behind their production. Since utensils are something used in everyday life, it would be reasonably assumed that this small dish and ladle in the Gettysburg collection should be categorized under Shanki, or lived objects. However, the percentage of lead within them was toxic, which suggests that they were not used by the living. Supporting this interpretation, their crudely and simply made forms further suggest non-functionality and an exclusively representational purpose. Thus, we can infer that in spite of being utensils, these objects were not real usable utensils, but were spirit articles, intended to represent objects used by the living, but created specifically to be buried with the dead.
Thank you, Allie. Oh, sorry.
Hi, everyone. This is an earthenware wellhead from the Han Dynasty, and it's around 22 centimeters in height and 20 centimeters in diameter. It is a miniature representation of a real wellhead, which is the part of the well structured over the hole dug for water. More specifically, it's the exposed part of a well that provides the suspension point for the rope and bucket. The wellhead is earthenware on the inside and bottom with iridescent patina and a green lead glaze on the outside. It has a cylinder base with 2 grooves that run horizontally around it, and on top of the rim is an arch that goes across the opening, which supports a superstructure with 2 holes, indicating where the ropes would go for pulleys to raise and lower water buckets. Above these holes, there is a tiled hip roof design. This wellhead is classified as a spirit article or minqi. In Chinese culture, spirit articles were used in funerary practices. They were specifically made for the dead and were placed in their tombs. According to Confucius, the supernatural were satisfied by the mere presence of these items, regardless of size or functionality. So they resemble real objects but are useless, hence the size of this wellhead. Spirit articles represent objects from everyday life that the soul of the deceased can use in the afterlife. Minqi are thought to have developed for an alternative to the funerary practice of the human sacrifice of enslaved people, favorite concubines, and servants. Wells were very common household items in ancient China and a part of routine life for the Chinese. They were a symbol of community and family order. Wells provided stable water sources and allowed territory expansion since humans no longer needed to live near surface water resources. They had many important roles, which is why they were then transformed into minqi. Wellhead minqi provided sustenance to the deceased, so their role in life was the same in the afterlife. Although this specific wellhead was from an elite tomb, well models are oftentimes found in modest tombs as the only minqi or one of few present, which allows us to conclude their value and importance to Chinese funeral culture. Due to popular makings of other wellheads, we can assume this one was made from clay like others of its kind. During the Han Dynasty, mass production of clay was easy and the material produced a lot of finely crafted objects in a short amount of time. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Maggie.
This water pot is a very small, rounded white clay vessel, less than 8 centimeters in diameter, with green, amber, and off-white glazing in an organic sort of dripping motif. The tricolor or Sangkai glazing appears only on the exterior of the pot and flows from the rim to just below the widest section, and the lack of any particular pattern or design indicates that these glazes were applied rather quickly or perhaps haphazardly. Additionally, the interior and the underside are unglazed and instead maintain their natural off-white kind of sandy earthenware look. Sangkai, meaning 3 colors, is the general term for the tricolored pottery that was produced during the Tang Dynasty between 618 and 906 CE. These wares are famous for their distinctive white, green, and brown or amber lead-based glazes. Some of the most beautiful Sunkai wares were handmade on potter's wheels, but most, like this particular water pot, were likely mass-produced using molds. So after forming the white clay into the chosen shape, in this case with a modeled mold, the ware would be fired twice. First at about 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, which was just to harden the clay body, and then afterward, the glazes would be applied kind of haphazardly, like I said, before firing the work once again at the much lower temperature of about 800 degrees. This would allow the lead-based Sangkai glazes to flow about freely, resulting in dynamic and organic designs, as well as the vibrant colors that can be seen on this water pot. Sunkai wares were a hallmark of Tang Dynasty grave goods, hence why it is in our collection, and tended to be figurines of humans or animals, as well as reproductions of household wares. This particular water pot is an example of a spirit object, or minqi, that was designed specifically to be placed in tombs as a symbolic representation of people or objects for use by the deceased in their afterlife, and was thus made more quickly and cheaply than a practical object meant for use during life would have been. It's also unsurprising that these glazes, similarly to those on the spoon and dish that Allie discussed, contain up to 80% lead content and would have been far too dangerous for practical use by the living. Additionally, many Sangkai pots have this distinctive kind of globe shape that is reminiscent of a squash or a gourd, which would have been widely recognizable at the time as a Taoist symbol of immortality and regeneration, which are, of course, important in seeking an eternal afterlife. This tradition of furnishing underground burial structures with sumptuous objects had become very popular among China's elite by the Tang Dynasty, as we've seen, but these small and more cheaply made wares, like this water pot, were an accessible alternative that gave the everyday masses a chance to experience a comfortable afterlife, even if they couldn't afford the most ornate wares. Despite being cheaply made, however, these Sangkai wares were so beautiful that they were frequently traded along the Silk Road, which conveniently started, or I guess ended, depending on which way you were traveling, at the Tang capital Chang'an in present-day Xi'an in northwest China. They were popular among many of the Tang's trading partners, such as Samara and Ctesiphon, Nishapur, Egypt and India, and Sunkai wares have even been excavated from burial sites as far as Japan and the Philippines. The way in which many of these cultures adopted this ancient practice of burying spirit objects with the deceased illustrates the immense impact of Silk Road trading on the transmission of culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Our last speaker today, Jennifer Johnson, has to work, so I'm going to read her talk. The male attendant tomb figurine, while standing at just 30 centimeters in height, represents a funerary ritual practice during the Song Dynasty. It is an insight into the customs and beliefs of the afterlife in China. This piece was created with clay, a commonly used medium for tomb figurines, and was once covered in a glaze, but the glaze has mostly been worn away with time. The figure stands with hands crossed at the base of the torso, the sleeves form-fitting to the arms. The face of the figurines is neutral in expression, and the most ornate visual aspects of the piece are the headgear and the robe. Indicative of a Song Dynasty fashion, the robe fits closely to the figure, while a cross-collar pull of the upper portion of the robe towards the right side, accented by a belt sectioning the torso from the waist and legs. With the exception of a detailing around the belt on the back of the figure, the robe appears relatively smooth and without texture or movement. The headgear is acting to tie the attendant's hair back and is one of the most detailed portions of the piece. The headgear is strikingly similar to futou, otherwise recognized as a popular style of a headwear during the Song Dynasty. Overall, the piece feels stationary and disciplined in nature, much like how a living attendant would be expected to behave and carry themselves while performing the duties given to them. Dating this piece to the Song Dynasty rather than the Tang Dynasty originally stated in the college database is based on several factors: the style of the robe and headgear and the color of the glaze. The majority of tomb figurines created during the Tang Dynasty are made of Sancai, the tricolored clay, such as the piece Hannah just spoke about, while the single colored glaze used for this piece was more popular during the Song Dynasty. This male attendant is categorized as a spirit object or mingqi, which are small portable tomb furnishings that are created for the dead and never intended to be used by the living. Archaeological evidence dates the first use of these figurines to the Mid-Eastern Zhou around the 7th century BCE. Tomb figurines are a substitute of human sacrifices. It is important to note that tomb figurines, such as this one, are not usually buried as single individual pieces, and rather buried in groups. Groups of figurines found in tombs include entertainers, soldiers, and figures doing household chores. All of these figurines were created to perform their depicted duties toward the buried. This is in accordance with the beliefs held in China that these pieces are more effective to the dead in large groups. There are stories of the spirits of the dead benefiting from having more figurines buried with them, such as a comfortable journey in the afterlife and a more luxurious afterlife based on the quality and the quantity of a tomb figurines buried wisdom. As a representation of a long-lasting belief and tradition held in China for centuries, this practice provides an insightful look at the burial practices of China. Thank you. I think this is actually the end of today's presentation. Now we're going to invite audience for any questions for our student curators.
I'll jump in. I'll try to get the ball rolling and just again remind everyone that that if you prefer, please type in a question or a comment in the chat box, and I'd be happy to read it for you. But with the male, just since we're looking at the male attendant figure, and before I ask my question, or I just want to congratulate everyone again. Everyone did a really wonderful job, and I learned so much. And a couple other things I wanted to say was I have had the chance to read the introductory essay for the catalog, which the students wrote collaboratively, and it's amazing, and I can't wait for you all to read the catalog in full, especially since the students also expand on these ideas in each of their essays. But back to my question, with this clay figure, would that have been fired?
I think to my knowledge, it should be low fired, yeah. And made, with mold.
Yeah. So this would have been kind of, and that's something else too, that they used molds for some of the other funerary objects too, that would have been buried, is that right?
Yeah, I think I'm going to defer that question to, a few students, Allie, Maggie, who have really researched, the spirit objects, like the example we're looking at here, the wellhead, and also the tricolor henna too, the tricolored, ceramic wares from the Han Dynasty, and these are, green, colored, glazed wares. Again, those are really funerary wares. Yeah, I think they really research about, the whole production process of those wares. So I'm going to defer those questions to, the students.
For the spoon and dish, I know utensils that were just representational like this were mass produced using molds.
Yeah, I talked about the bowl, and that was also likely made with a mold, which I think Amanda kind of detailed the molding process, but for bronze, and it was pretty similar, kind of. But I know that the Metropolitan Museum of Art has a few examples of these molds that were used then for the clay to be pressed into and molded.
Mm-hmm.
If I can just jump in with a question. I wanted to ask Hannah specifically with the tong bowl. What indications, even if lots of things were made with molds, what indications on this piece actually tell you that it was mold made?
Specifically this piece, I think it's more the fact the size, that it's very small, shows us that it was probably, and just the other indications that these glazes were applied very haphazardly, they weren't painted on, they were put on and were able to drip. So that these all indicate that it was mass produced, which is then a clue that, okay, it was probably made with a mold to be kind of a cheap ware, versus there's these really fancy Sangkai ewers and figurines that the glazing is a little bit more detailed and they're a little bit bigger. So that is kind of the clue that it would be made with a mold as well, because it was mass produced.
Interesting. I would suggest that you look at and think a little bit maybe more differently, because it makes sense to do use molds for mass production and just fast, simple things contemporarily. But this form in the hands of a skilled thrower would be faster to make on the wheel than it would be from a mold. And so there may be some kind of contemporary versus period confusion, because as I look at this, it strikes me very specifically as pretty quickly thrown. I mean, there may be indications on the bottom or the sides that I can't see from the image that might indicate otherwise. But just keep in mind that speed in the hands of a skilled thrower does not necessarily mean that it takes a long time. Just something to consider. I'll let somebody else have another question. I have a few more on my list.
Yeah, I think, Tina, I think that's actually a good point. In general, we assume, funerary, because those are really funerary wares. So in general, we assume they were made, in large quantities, in faster speed. So we, rarely we thought about they could be made, individually. I think that's an interesting, for specific cases, that's an interesting direction to go, to examine more details to see whether or not, they could be, handmade. That's a good point. Yeah. Because
throwers, I mean, even contemporary throwers in China in production facilities are throwing small cups in a matter of 20 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So our idea of speed may be a little bit skewed Westernly and also contemporarily. Okay, I'll back off. Go ahead. Next person.
Thank you. That's really fascinating to think about. I'm going to ask Robin's question, and Robin, feel free to.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. I am just fascinated by the fact that you all did this work remotely. And I want to understand how you looked at these things remotely. Oh. And some of these are so small. I don't know how you did this. Would some of you talk a little bit about what it was like to be sitting at your homes doing an exhibit like this? I just think your process, it's really challenging, I think.
Well, I think I can say a little bit about that. And then I think Caroline Sutter, feel free to, jump in. In fact, at the beginning of the semester, the class did have, the opportunity to visit the special collection, because we intentionally scheduled the visit, I think, in the first class. So students did have, one time at least, look at the objects, at the special collection. But afterwards, I think we pretty much did, the virtual visit through, the GoPro, camera. I think I'm going to ask Caroline Sutter to, comment on that. I think they did a wonderful job.
Well, sure. I would like to add that I know how Carolyn did it, obviously, but I just want to hear what the students have to say about what it was like to research in this environment.
I'll hop in. It was difficult. I would say, being normally able to have access to not only the pieces themselves, but also, a library's worth of texts and different sorts of databases. And then kind of having that stripped away, you have to just completely reevaluate your method and the way that you approach these things. I think, like Professor Soon was saying, having the first visit was definitely helpful, because at least you got to see your piece. I wouldn't have known had I looked at my jade horse head that it was only 2 inches tall had I never been able to see it in person. I think there was definitely a lot more reliance on your own intuition and your own. It kind of gave, I think, at least in my opinion, it kind of gave us the opportunity to really make it an individual experience, because it's not like we're sitting in the classroom all together having these conversations. So it really was your own creation, your own responsibility to undertake this research. So you kind of got to guide your own path. I have to say, like, the school databases online really came in handy. But again, to get information, especially with these pieces, which are, you know, over 1,000 years old, you really have to sit and kind of I dedicated like an hour or two just to find something. You know, you have to, you know, test all the different keywords, test all the different, you know, time periods, and kind of see what you can get, and then say, okay, is this valuable? Like, could I use this? So there's definitely a big, you know, time management comes in handy, and, you know, just being able to dissect different types of information, because like you said, Robin, we are home. Like, I've been sitting in my bedroom all semester. So it's really, you know, up to you to kind of make those decisions, which I think in a way is, you know, helpful, and might not have been possible to develop those kinds of skills had we been in person. So it was definitely an interesting experience.
I'd like to hop in as well really quickly. I just want to say I never even actually got to see my piece in person because we were sent home before we assigned our works. Carolyn actually did multiple sessions with me, not just the one that we all did in class. That she was really helpful and, you know, gave me lots of close-ups and answered my questions about, is that a black glaze or is that a brown glaze? And can you please show me the bottom? And can you shift it? And can you let me take a photo? So that was super helpful. And I'm looking forward to hopefully in February getting to see it in person.
And I want to chime in too. We did on Monday, we did a virtual exhibition design class with the GoPro camera with Carolyn and Sydney moving the objects around, and me talking to the camera, into, you know, one camera, and them working in another camera. And I just have to say that the students were very responsive and had thoughts, and it didn't approximate, you know, being there in real life, but I really have to, you know, just express my gratitude to the students for speaking up and participating really well, and deciding, really helping us decide what should go where and why it should go where it goes. And so even the exhibition design process is really their own, and I'm just really impressed with the kind of ownership over the works that you know, Allie and Hannah described, that it was, you know, start to finish throughout the whole process.
Yeah, and if you would unshare your screen for a moment, I can share what the setup looks like for the GoPro. Thank you. And you can ask another question, folks. So this is from an actual class research visit. So you can see a number of the pieces are here, and you can see Professor Sun looking closely into the camera herself from her own home, and the student looking from their place, and Shannon also being available on this particular one. And as you can see, the GoPro camera, which is just up here underneath the ring light, actually shows the student an individual piece. This is the B disc that you'll see at Friday's presentation. It's on its side here in person. And I have an iPad that lets me zoom in with the camera view. So when someone asks to see, can they see the bottom and can they see the mark on the bottom? I'll actually zoom all the way in. So the one really lovely thing is that it's synchronous. So if the student has a live question, the faculty member is present. I'm present as the piece, and the student can ask a live question at that moment in time. So I'm just really appreciative that we were able to do this during this semester, since we had such an unusual challenge of having folks in so many locations. I'll unshare now so you can go back to the slideshow. Thank you. And thank you everyone for your patience and your true creativity in doing the projects.
Yeah, I think the research process is a truly amazing process. You know, normally the class will visit the special collection at least 3 or 4 times, you know, during the semester to, you know, prepare this, you know, exhibition. So yeah, I'm very, very much impressed actually by their, research. Very devoted, class. So I, as a faculty member, I feel I'm very lucky actually to, work with this group of wonderful, students.
Tina, I don't know if you wanted to, you
Yes.
said you had a couple more
I have
questions.
I do. I have another question. And since I put Hannah a little bit on the hot seat, Hannah, once we get back in February, I'd be happy to take a look at that piece with you and walk you through some tiny little nuances that might help you discern if it was crankware thrown as we would refer to it. That's kind of speed throwing, or if there's a little cue on it that might indicate some kind of mold bit. But I do have a question for Maggie, since some of these things were kind of shared across some of the ceramic objects. And since I gave Hannah the hot seat on that one, I'll give, I think it's, no, it's not Maggie. It is Allie. I think it's Allie.
Is that the
Yes.
ladle and the dish? The ladle?
Yes, the ladle and the dish.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Yeah.
Allie, I think you spoke about the lead glaze and that indicated it was not for use.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you about what's your sense of the awareness of the toxicity of lead at that period of time might have been.
Yeah, Professor Soon warned me that this was going to be a question. If that were the only clue, then I wouldn't be sure that it proves anything, but it's also the crudely made ceramic forms and the cheaply made materials that show that it was one of the representational ones.
Interesting. And so, you're suggesting that the kind of divots and chips and edge wear on the spoon is from excavation or being buried rather than from use prior to it going in?
I didn't suggest that, but yes, I think it's possible that it's just from its age and not from getting nicked from use as a spoon. Is that what you were asking?
Yes, it's kind of what I'm getting at. And I think part of what I'm cueing on is there seems to be this sense that that for the funerary kind of representational items, that it's always kind of quickly made and cheaply produced, that it doesn't need to do as much as a real object might need to do in everyday life. And I understand that. But that also the sense that quickly made is often the case for everyday use items. Even in an era, a period of time where those items are made by hands, you can kind of think of it as the handmade Walmart cup and bowl versus the elaborate Tiffany style, super involved, fancy ware that is the fine china on the president's dinner table. That fast making can be for cheap life use as well, or cheaper life use as well. And so I just invite the extra looking that sometimes those cues can come from the kind of damage that's on the surface of the thing or on the edges of the thing, and that those things can tell you potentially whether it's use damage or some other kind of damage. This is coming obviously from the ceramics person who lives with pots all over the place. This is my whole kitchen. And so I see an enormous amount of use damage. And so contemporary potters become maybe more quickly savvy about what that use damage looks like. And so that's why I'm cueing you into it.
Yeah, I think I can add a little bit here, for your comments. based on archaeological excavations for the Eastern Han, I think that's the period, when, these two pieces we thought, are made. Often lacquer wares are wares used in, everyday life. And pottery, yes, I think, were used in everyday wear, in everyday life as well. But they look, I think, very different from the wares we are looking at here. So I would say to some extent also based on, archaeological excavations, we try to make distinctions, between the wares, that's supposed to be used, in the everyday life, and wares that were made, just for, the deceased. Yeah, they are also, for example, painted, nicely painted, ceramic wares. I'm sure you know from the Han, dynasty. But this kind of wares, often based on the majority of the archaeological excavations, they are funerary wares. Just based on what I, read. But I think you're right, crudely made doesn't mean they need to be, funerary wares. I think some archaeologists in China also question that kind of a criteria to identify, the funerary wares, in tombs. That's a very good point. Yeah.
Okay,
I have another question too, if as long as I'm not hogging the floor, but I just wondered if any of you had this aha moment while you were doing your research, where you were just going along and then you just had like a discovery or a breakthrough or just something that you weren't expecting and then you learned about.
Deirdre, do you want to say something about that?
Oh, sure. I wasn't sure, I didn't want to talk if it's for the other half of the class, but oh my gosh, something in particular. I don't know if this is what you're thinking of, but so when I was initially trying to research this piece, I was looking up tomb rubbings and I was getting nowhere. I'm looking up tomb rubbings, ink rubbings, Han Dynasty rubbings. I'm getting nowhere. And finally, I typed in Han Dynasty tombs. So my piece, it hasn't been presented yet, is a ink rubbing of a stone carving at a tomb. But what I hadn't thought of was articles haven't been written on rubbings of the carvings. Articles were just written on the carvings themselves. So the minute I typed in tomb carvings, I got 1 million responses. But I hadn't thought of or 1 million results, but I hadn't thought of putting carvings and not rubbings. That was 20 minutes of me being I can't find anything. So that was a big breakthrough for me, but it was really just one little key word that completely changed what I was finding. So that was a big moment.
Great, that's interesting. I'm going to ask Chuck's question, and I think Carolyn has volunteered
for it.
So I'm going to read out Chuck's question for the purposes of our video. Chuck would like to know more about the donors of the objects. Did Frank Kramer, for example, leave much information on them? How did he become interested in Chinese art? That's a great question. And then secondly, why did Judith and Arthur Hart Burling donate to the college? Did they have a personal connection to the college? And he's aware of them as authors of the book Chinese Art, which was published in the 1950s. So thank you so much for that question, Chuck, and I'll turn it over to Carolyn.
Thank you, Chuck. I may not have a thorough explanation for you at this moment in time, but I want to encourage you that we just had an exhibit called Teaching with Asian Art, and it was all about Dr. Kramer and his collection. And Dr. Kramer is actually a class of 1914 at Pennsylvania College, now Gettysburg College. He came back in 1920 to teach as a professor of education. And he was actually keenly interested in material culture and particularly Asian art culture. So he collected himself and lived on Broadway. And what he did is he put together a class on Asian art that was taught here at the college all the way up until the 1960s. And he would actually invite students to come to his home and see the pieces and teach from the pieces in his home. He would also bring in bags and boxes of the collections, including ivories, jades, and some of the porcelains you saw, and teach directly from the pieces. So what's really exciting about Dr. Kramer's collection is that he was teaching with it while he was here at Gettysburg College. And then after his death in 1963, the collection was given to the college with his papers. So in special collections are inventories, and Karen Drickemer is instrumental in how the collection is organized. And I can't thank her enough for all the work she put into organizing the papers so that these students could actually have whatever information we had available about when he purchased them, if he was given any information by the donors. Also, he became recognized for his collection and other objects followed. So for example, the Burling family, I don't have a lot of examples of what else they gave, but it was known that they were authors and that if items were given to the college, they would be taught with. So what's exciting is that in most cases, Chester North, who also donated, Fraser, who also donated, they donated because they knew the pieces would be seen. Musselman Library is now where the collection is held, except for the pieces on exhibit, but Schmucker was the library. And there was an Asian art room on the 3rd floor of Dr. Kramer's collection and other pieces donated. And students actually and researchers could use and have access to those actually back when Schmucker was the library. So I hope that's just a taste for it. Feel free to contact us about more information. And you can look at the papers of Dr. Frank Kramer Finding Aid that tells you more about what we have, and you're welcome to do a research visit with us at any time to learn more about Dr. Kramer and the other donors to the collection. Thank you for the question.
Well, we're coming up right at 5 o'clock, so I'll give everyone another minute or so if you'd like to ask another question. But if not, please come back. Same time, same place. But Friday at 4 o'clock to hear more students present on some incredible objects. But thank you all so much for being here, and well done, students.